Loud. There we go. Okay, there we are. All right, so we're going to go ahead and share screen. We are starting a new chapter today. So you will notice that I am skipping gender and sexuality. First of all, the psych department has kind of talked about the chapter, and we kind of think it could be even a little more up to date, despite the fact that the book was made in 2020. Additionally, Dr. Teets, one of our other psychology faculty, teaches classes in human sexuality and psych of women and gender. And so you have some more opportunities to get in depth with that. Because we only have so much time, I generally tend to focus on the chapters that I'm a bit more comfortable with. And I love sensation and perception. We have a lot of different illusions that we are going to talk about today. And I think you're going to like these. If you have any questions, as you can see, there's a lot of material in these slides. So what I will kind of tell you is that if we're getting close to the end of class time and you have questions, write them down and you can ask me after class. But for right now, we're doing okay. So we are talking about sensation and perception today. If you are curious, I do teach a course in this. Usually I teach it every other fall or every other spring. We're still trying to figure out when I'm going to teach it, but it's every other year. We cover things like vision. The whole first half of the entire semester is devoted to vision because it is our best known sense. We also talk about taste. We talk about touch. We talk about smell, and we talk about hearing and our vestibular sense. So this is going to be a very, very short version of this. I'm going to pull the screen down just a little bit because it's cutting off and it's annoying me. Okay, so when you hear sensation and perception, you might think that they are being used interchangeably, that sensation and perception mean the exact same thing. This is not entirely correct. Sensation is basically when our sensory receptors, so these are specialized neurons that are designed to take actual physical stimulus energy from the environment, and they're going to convert it into a signal that your brain actually uses. So those sensory receptors and our nervous system are going to take in that physical energy from the environment. So if we're talking about sight, if we're talking about vision, what is the physical energy that we're talking about? It's light. Yeah, I heard somebody say light. If it's hearing, what is it? It's sound pressure waves that cause changes in air pressure. What about something like smell? What's the physical sense there? Yeah, Aurora.
Tiny molecules coming off of whatever you're smelling.
Yeah, so they're tiny little molecules of smell. The term that we actually use is odorants. You don't need to write that down, I'm just sharing. With taste, we have different molecules associated with things like sweetness and sourness and things like that. So with touch, we have things like actual pressure on our skin, physical force. So we're taking in actual physical energy, and then our sensory receptors are going to convert that into a signal that the brain can actually use and process. So sensation would be you hearing a sound. Perception is a little bit different. Perception is when your brain is organizing and actually interpreting what you sensed. So sensation is hearing a sound. Perception is recognizing that that is a voice of your friend saying your name. So sensation might be recognizing a smell. Perception is recognizing that it's chocolate chip cookies. Does anybody have any questions so far? Does anybody need some more time here? All right. So when we talk about sensation, so this is something I talk about more in my cognitive psychology class. We have a distinction between what we call bottom-up processing and what we call top-down processing. So bottom up processing is actually pretty straightforward. This happens in our external environment. So if I see the letter A, what's going to happen is that my sensory receptors are basically going to break down that information and then work it, basically work its way up to recognizing that we have A. So bottom up processing is when we start with the sensory receptors and then we work up to a more complex representation in our brain or mind. So for example, our letter A is basically what we see here is the letter A, but we start by seeing a black blob basically broken down into its features, and then we combine them so that we can perceive it as A. So we start with the basic representation, and then we work our way up to saying, oh yeah, that's an A.
So in terms of like knowing that we break things down like that, how scientists determine that this is the way that bottom-up processing works?
Well, because we have so at different parts of our brain, we do actually have cells that are specialized for very specific orientations. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So primary visual cortex, the very first part in the cortex where we deal with vision, we actually have what are called feature detectors, or what we call more specifically orientation tuning. So the idea is that each cell in the primary visual cortex has a preferred, so it responds to bars of light, but it responds to them in a very particular orientation. So one particular cell may only like a line in this orientation. So if it sees a line in this orientation, it's going to fire at a very, very high rate. If you get something like a horizontal line, it may fire less. And so that's the first place in the brain where we really deal with vision. So we are kind of starting with those basic features, and with additional areas of the visual cortex, we get into more complex processes. So V2, for example, V2 actually can respond to things like moving bars of light. I think by the time we get to another area of visual cortex, we actually are processing form and motion and attention and object recognition. So we know this basically by looking at cellular responses.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, but I think you bring up a really good point, because here's the catch. We are human beings. We have memories, we have knowledge, we have expectations. So that means that we can use our experience and our prior knowledge to help us figure out how to process something. So for example, can anybody tell me what they see right here? Now, I want to be really clear. Those are not actual letters. But here's what I find really interesting. You use your knowledge of language to interpret this one as an H and this one as an A, despite the fact that neither of them looks like a letter. And additionally, so for example, we know that this has to be an H because really, unless we're talking about Taibo or Taekwondo, we don't really have a lot of letters in the English language that go T-A-E. On the other hand, this one is going to be interpreted as an A rather than an H, because in our language, we do not have CHT. You don't have a long string of consonants like that without a vowel. So we use our prior knowledge to help us figure out what it is we're seeing. And you actually use top-down processing all the time. So for example, if you know that your suite mate has like calculus class on a certain day and calculus really stresses them out, and you just happen to kind of realize that they tend to be a bit more argumentative on the days that they have calculus, you learn really quickly not to take that personally because of your knowledge, your memories, and your expectations. So top-down processing comes into play a lot of the time, and most of our interpretations of the world around us are going to be a combination of both bottom-up and top-down. Generally speaking, we don't prioritize one over the other. We tend to use both at all times.
Have you ever seen those posts where it's like they put two of the same letters right next to each other in words and it like skips over the letters?
So what's actually really interesting, I kind of talked about this in grad school because there was like a viral post that went around when I was in college that was basically you read the first and the last letter of a word and then you can scramble all of the stuff inside and it doesn't matter, you'll still read it. So what's kind of weird about that is that they always say that it's a study from Cambridge. So in grad school, I actually had to talk about that in one of our seminars. No such Cambridge study exists. I know that this information came from somewhere. I just don't know where. It is definitely not a study from Cambridge. But yeah, when I was in college, that was a really big thing. I even saw it on a sign in a Jimmy John's once. Okay. So generally, you can think of sensation as bottom-up processing, and you can think of perception as functioning as top-down processing. Sensory processes and perceptual processes are going to work together to help us sort out complex images like this one. This doesn't look like much, but the longer that you look at it, the more faces that you see in the picture, and it's creepy. Happy spoopy season. I don't consider it spoopy season until October, so.
Well, very.
You're lucky. I'm a Christmas person. I am not one of those people. My birthday is 2 weeks before Christmas. What is wrong with?
Okay, mine's 2 weeks before Halloween.
Okay, well then I can understand why you might like Halloween. I hope you understand why I like Christmas. I get all of my presents in one fell swoop.
But
I-
would hate that. Yeah,
I kind of do. Well, I will tell you, occasionally I do get the dreaded Christmas birthday combo gift. Hate. Mike makes fun of me because he's like, yeah, I got you your birthday and your Christmas gift combined. And I'm like, no. And he's like, haha, got you. I think he likes to push my buttons a little bit.
That's really like spreading out experiences.
My sister's birthday is in August, so I'm always a little jealous that she gets a re-up on presents. In a way that I don't.
I should have got the combination graduation birthday gift.
Oh, congrats your birthday.
Yeah.
Congrats your birthday.
That's what we call my.
Because it's on my birthday.
Oh,
My birthday after graduation. Normally I have my birthday during finals, but last year I got to graduate.
that's nice. My birthday is always during finals. Nobody can ever do anything, and that's been true since college. Okay, mine's on the 10th, so we will be done with classes by then.
You go back to the list. Like,
Yeah, totally. That's all right. You were too busy looking at all the eyes, weren't you?
Yeah.
It's creepy.
yeah.
It's so creepy. Quit staring at me. I know, and the more that you look at it, the more that you find. Well, I think it looks creepy. We're allowed to have our own opinions about art. That is true. That is true. All right, Kenna, you just let me know when, okay? You good? All right. What do you see here? This one's a little harder. Did you see, what is it? It's a Dalmatian. You see it now? Here's his head, here's his legs.
Oh, I was like,
You can look at a dog's butt, it's fine. Okay, how about this one? It's kind of a crane. Don't let it be a goose. Goose are mean.
I don't still see it.
You don't see it? Okay, here's its bill. Here's its long swoopy neck.
I think someone just took a really bad picture and then they were trying to make something out of it. and using, what is that called, like pareidolia?
What if I told you that I made this picture?
Uh,
I didn't. I didn't.
stand by that.
I was like, I wanted to see what you would do if I was like, I took that picture, Savannah. Well, I do take bad pictures, but I did not take this picture.
I wouldn't really be upset if you said you did take this picture because I don't feel like I'm making a character judgment. Of
course not.
Bad.
No, that wouldn't be an ad hominem at all.
It really just looks like a face. That's like an eye, that's his nose.
Ah.
That's your chin
I
out.
can see a weird dog.
Okay. So, oh, wait until we get into the illusions, y'all. It's gonna get even better. No, we can't. We got to talk about how sensation works first. This is a little less entertaining, but it's still important. So here's what's kind of interesting. Despite the fact that your sensory systems are all responsible for different things, all of your sensory systems all do the same three things. So first of all, they receive physical stimulus energy. So in the case of vision, they get photons of light. In the case of hearing, they get modulations in sound pressure waves. In the case of touch, they get things like temperature and pressure, like when somebody gives you a really firm handshake and almost squeezes your hand off, like my grandfather used to. As they have demonstrated here. So you're going to receive that physical stimulus energy. At that point, you are going to convert that physical energy into a signal that the brain can actually interpret. So you're going to turn it from physical energy into action potentials. This process is what is known as transduction. And then finally, you're going to deliver this information to the brain so it can be interpreted.
Can you repeat what transduction?
Yes, you're basically converting physical stimulus energy into a signal that the brain can use. So you're basically converting that energy into action potentials. So here's something that's kind of cool. The message that you are getting is always going to be the same. It's an action potential, but based on the nerve that is stimulated, that affects what kind of sensation you get. So electricity from, or action potentials from the optic nerve are basically going to lead to you seeing vision. Information from the auditory nerve is going to be hearing. The message is the same, but the nerves are different. So this is called, and by the way, you don't need to write this down. I'm just sharing my sensation and perception knowledge. This was originally developed by Johann Mueller. It's called the doctrine of specific nerve energies. It is not the message that differs between the senses. It is the type of nerve stimulated. That's just a fun little bit of knowledge for those who like enrichment. So here's my question for you. Why are we aware of some stimuli, but not of others? Yeah.
Did we talk about delivering?
Yes, we deliver that information to the specific part of the brain that processes it.
Okay.
So those action potentials are going to go to the part of the brain that starts to process that information. That's when perception starts coming into play.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So why are we aware of some stimuli, but not others? Yeah,
I
Anna.
don't know if it's the right term, but perception of blindness, where you just kind of like stop noticing the way your clothes rub against your body or something.
Well, the term that we actually use is called habituation a little bit. We're going to talk about it. It's adaptation. So for example, if you spray a lot of perfume on yourself, at first you'll notice it, but then eventually you get used to it. The problem is that other people are used to it. Lily, yeah. So maybe it's being delivered below a certain threshold, and I think that that's a really good call. It could be that you're not paying attention to it. That could be another issue. So this is the part where I talk about subliminal processing. I don't really believe in subliminal processing. I'm not arguing that it doesn't happen. It's just that everything that you've ever been told about subliminal processing is probably incorrect. So usually you'll hear, at first, I am a product of my time. I am a child of the 80s and the 90s. I first heard about subliminal processing from Saved by the Bell.
Oh,
And I remember distinctly the teacher in that episode talking about somebody flashing drink Coca-Cola and eat popcorn on the movie screen of a movie theater, and sales of both went up. How many of you have heard of that? You've probably heard of that in pop culture at some point. That is based on a hoax. The person who reported that happening actually made that up. I know everything you know is wrong. Now, occasionally, sometimes people will tell me, but what about the FedEx logo? Or what about the Tostitos logo? They have little hidden messages. Here's the catch. If you have enough time to look at them, they're not hidden messages. So they're not truly subliminal. Something that is subliminal will be missed by you, even if you are actively looking for it. So I will get there in a minute, but I want you to ask yourself, can we have a situation where we sense, but we cannot perceive? So we're going to talk about a really interesting case of something called prosopagnosia. Now, this is often due to brain damage around areas of the fusiform gyrus, which is located around the temporal lobe. Now, some people have this due to things like stroke, damage by too much, not enough oxygen to the brain, so what we would call an anoxic episode. This can also happen in some people with autism spectrum disorders. Some people are known to have prosopagnosia with that. So here's what they have. They don't have problems recognizing objects, but if you show them a face, they have an inability to recognize faces by sight. This is a case where they sense, they can see that it's a face, but they cannot, they know it's somebody's face, but they can't perceive who that face belongs to. Yes.
okay, so you say the inability to recognize faces, which is what the slide say, but then you add it by sight. So are they able to recognize faces by feel like you might if you were blind?
So I know that they use other visual cues to help recognize people. So clothing can be a really good example. Hair can be a really good example. The sound of their voice, that's going to come into play. I don't know if what you said would be one of those instances. These people are not blind. They do
Right.
not have any visual impairments, except it seems to be a loss of perception.
But the other perceptual things that you're describing
Uh-huh.
are almost more like context clues, and I'm curious if being able to feel someone's face.
I would assume so, but
Is
here's
also-
where it gets a little tricky for me.
Yeah.
Like faces largely all have a very similar construction. And it's part of the reason why a lot of people believe that face recognition is really special, because most of us not have noses on our forehead. We all have approximately eyes occupying the same place, noses occupying the same place, and a mouth occupying the same place. So the problem is, it is not recognizing on the basis of parts. We're looking at these subtle differences between the parts and the relationship between the parts to figure out whose face belongs to who. You and I all have eyes, nose, and a mouth, but they're organized in different ways. My eyes are super close together. Some of yours are not. Some of yours are a little more wide set. Some of you have a mouth that is lower on your face and closer to your nose. It's those subtle relationships that you have to be able to detect. And I don't know if you would be able to recognize that subtlety with touch.
I don't think so either, and I think that it might be different if they were born with it versus brain damage, because of the plasticity that happens when your brain overcomes sort of disability.
Yeah, but remember, if you're older when it happens, it's harder to get that plasticity rolling, and it does take more time.
And so if it was like because of But if it's excessive damage, I feel like that would be possible, but I was curious why you said visual.
Because they can use other cues to figure it out and other senses. Anna, what did you have to add?
I was just gonna ask, if they can't recognize the actual face itself, can they perceive facial expressions?
That's a really good question. I'm assuming not. So we're gonna watch a video of a woman that has prosopagnosia. She has on eyeliner. And so I feel like she has enough visual ability to be able to put on eyeliner herself, or she has somebody helping her put on makeup. But the problem is not vision. So I can put makeup on a face, but there's some additional information and interpretation going on that is not, this is my face. It's just, I'm putting makeup on a face that I have been told is mine, but I don't actually feel like it's mine. Does that kind of make sense?
So in a sense, it'd almost be like everyone looks the same, facial wise.
I don't know. That's a really good question. Yeah, Kenna.
Yeah, I remember watching this one video from a YouTuber who had prosopagnosia, and where they like took one of the like tests.
Some reasons why this kind of happens. And it seems that the fusiform gyrus might be an area that's really critical for object knowledge. And so they have a face. She's able to take photographs of her mother. She just can't recognize that it's her mom just based on vision alone. Yes.
I also noticed like she focused on like a shirt color that her mom was wearing instead of things like her hair.
Yeah.
Is it? How does like hair and stuff connect? Because she saw Marilyn Monroe's hair and like noticed that as a distinctive feature, but she wasn't really trying to rely on that as a feature when comparing all of the women in the age group of her mom.
Well, I wonder if it's because it was black and white photographs, so she didn't necessarily have color to help her. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's pretty complicated and
Maybe. Although if I had a daughter that couldn't recognize my face, I'd really try to keep those things consistent.
Yeah, no, that's
For her
totally
sake.
fair.
Because I would love my daughter.
Yeah.
And I understand that obviously she's emotionally distressed.
So when we talk about the relationship between sensation and perception and our experience of a sense, we are talking about a branch of psychology called psychophysics. So psychophysics basically studies the relationship between physical stimuli and your psychological experience of those things. Now, I like talking about psychophysics because really it is the only time that we get to talk about laws in psychology. So there are a couple of laws. There are relationships between the physical world and how we experience them. So in the physical world, we have light. We experience that as brightness. In the physical world, we have sound. We can experience that as pitch or volume. For pressure, we have the experience of weight. For tastes of sugar, we get sweetness. So those are just a few examples. Ooh. Part of my back is sore, so I put my knuckles back here. I'm like, oh, that feels really good. Yeah, Anna.
Random thought.
Okay.
Back to that perception top-down processing.
Yeah.
If instead of having a word like the cat, things, if they had put the word chat, having H and an A right next to each other, do you think we would have been able to visualize separating the same thing into an H versus an A?
Yes, I think we would have. I think we would have, again, because in that particular instance, in our English language, we do not go to consonants without having a vowel. I can think of very few words in the English language that have 3 consonants in a row that are not being treated as a vowel in some sort of way. Usually we have two and then a vowel. So in that case, we would probably perceive the first one as an H and the second one as an A.
And wouldn't it also be like, there isn't a word that's spelled C-A-H-T that is readily available?
Right. Well, and that's my point too. Mhm. Okay, is everybody good here? Heidi, do you need a little more time?
Oh, no, I was just writing more.
Okay. All right. So when we do, our ability to actually sense things is based. Hey, y'all, I can hear some people talking in the back and I'm not trying to be rude. I have trouble thinking about what I'm going to say when I can hear talking. I'm really sensitive to sound. Did I bring up Siri by saying seriously?
Might have.
I do that all the time. It's embarrassing. But I'm super sensitive to sound. So sometimes it's hard for me to hear myself think. So just, you can talk, just be really quiet if you do. Okay. All right. Yeah. I am. Well, I don't know if it's a good thing or not. I'm still processing.
Yeah.
I'm still processing.
I
Okay.
think a nice way to say that, I felt the same way about my ADHD. It's like, it doesn't feel good, but it feels really good to know, because now I know how to hear.
Well, and I would have known either way, whether I was or I wasn't. Anyway, so our being able to sense something is based on a threshold. If something is below our threshold, we will not perceive it. If something is above our threshold, we will perceive it. So that threshold is really critical. Now, we have what is called an absolute threshold. This is the minimum that we need to detect a particular stimulus 50% of the time. We'll talk about why it's 50% in a minute, but I want to give you an example of how thresholds pop up in your everyday life. How many of you got hearing tests at school as kids? I'm about to sneeze. Okay.
Apple,
Huh?
pineapple, apple.
Oh, I say orange. Orange works too. So what sort of things did you have to do when you had to take a hearing test at school? You'd have to raise your hand and they'd play different sounds, right? But they varied in terms of volume, like boop. Yeah, Danny, you got something a little different?
Well, they did ours in a dark room with a light up board. I never could actually tell when they were playing noises, but the whole room light up red. It's the noise. So I just wait till the room lit up.
Yikes.
Which, as soon as they figured out what I was doing, they started going behind me in the regular light room, and then I started failing hearing tests.
Oh. But you had to hear sounds of different volumes and you would have to raise your hand when you heard it. They were trying to find your absolute threshold. Now you might be asking yourself, Dr. Gilchrist, why is it 50%? Why would it not be what I'm able to detect 100% of the time or 99% of the time? So you're just going to have to trust me on this one. This one is kind of a quirk of how our neurons work. So most people believe that thresholds kind of work like this, where it's like, I hear it, I hear it, I hear it. It's below my threshold. I don't hear it. So we kind of believe that our perception and our sensation kind of functions like a sharp cutoff point. But the truth of the matter is that our neurons fire on the basis of a distribution. So they don't fire like this. They kind of work like this. They kind of work like this, where it's like that. So this 50% mark, what that basically means is that sometimes your neuron at this point is going to process it, but sometimes it isn't. And it's basically at that 50% point, the middle of that distribution, where your threshold is. So this 50% point, anything that's above it, you'll hear it. Anything that is below it, you won't. So it's 50% because of a weird quirk of how our neurons work. Did you have a question, Aurora?
Yeah, so for people who have like sensory issues, how does that factor into this? Because like sensory overload, when you have too many things that you're noticing at once, how does that factor into what threshold is happening?
So if you're super sensitive, you're going to have a lower threshold. If you're hyposensitive, you're going to have a higher threshold. So everybody has a different threshold. For me, I'm super sensitive with hearing. One of my stepfathers used to call me eagle ears, which doesn't make any sense because eagles have good sight, not good hearing. But I could hear anything, despite the fact that I put my headphones on blast and will be deaf someday, I'm sure, from hearing loss. So here's how it kind of works. So in those cases, if you are hypersensitive or hyposensitive, you're going to probably have a different threshold. So here's how it kind of works. Here's the intensity of a stimulus. Here's your percentage of correct detections. So as I kind of said, your threshold kind of works on a continuum. Here is your 50% threshold. So this would correspond to your absolute threshold. So anything above this threshold, you will detect. Anything that is below, you will not. So something that is subliminal is something that is presented below your absolute threshold, but is still influencing your behavior in some sort of way. Now, I'm kind of skeptical about subliminal processing. I don't always think it exists, and it's very hard to scientifically demonstrate, but some people have shown that you can process information without conscious awareness. So people who were briefly flashed with the Apple logo compared to the IBM logo, so this was presented so quickly that they wouldn't be able to see it even if they were looking for it. People who were flashed the Apple logo actually came up with more creative uses for a brick than people who were flashed the IBM logo. Yeah, Abby.
It's kind of like an experience that I had at my Nana's house. She likes to have her volume up really loud so that she can hear it.
Uh-huh.
And I was just like kind of sitting in the room with her, and it turns out like there was like an ad that was on, and since it was so loud, I could hear like right at the before the ad cut off, it was like, oh, I'll buy that like on the TV.
Oh, wow.
But like I could hear that, and I was like, I didn't realize it at first, but I was like, oh, that's subliminal messaging.
Yeah, it could be. It could be. I've occasionally heard the rumors, and when I was in high school, you better believe that everybody, whenever we watched Disney movies in Spanish class, we didn't watch the movie. We spent all of our time talking about the supposed subliminal messages that were in the Disney movies. And I don't know what I think about those, but subliminal basically means that it's below this threshold, but it's still enough to affect your behavior. So another type of threshold, and we're going to end with this slide. How many of you go to the eye doctor? Yeah, you do.
I didn't get.
Oh, you want me to go back?
Sorry.
That's all right. So when you go to the eye doctor, when they're trying to give you new lenses and they're trying to figure out what your prescription is, what do? What looks better, 1 or 2, 1 or 2, and then they're like 2 or 3. They go up really high for me. I think I've gotten up to 8 before. Yeah, I've gotten up to 8, but when did they stop the process? They stop when you say that they're both the same. What they're doing is they're getting what is called a difference threshold. You being able to notice a difference in stimuli 50% of the time. So this is the minimum difference between two stimuli. So this is you being able to figure out if 2 pitches are different, if 2 levels of brightness are different, if 2 types of visual acuity are different, if 2 weights in your hand are different. You will be looking for a difference threshold. So make sure that you know the difference between an absolute threshold and a difference threshold. I do like to test on them. All right, y'all. So once you're done writing this down, feel free to leave. Have a wonderful weekend. Relax. If you're gonna have family over family weekend, I will be working at the President's Ice Cream Social. Let's hope I don't get as much caramel on my watch and my phone and my pants like I did for the one at the beginning of the school year. Have a great weekend. I will see you back here on Monday.